The auction, 800 words. The air hung heavy with dust and anticipation, sunlight filtering through the slats of the old wooden barn. Every creak of the floorboards, every shuffle of boots, seemed amplified in the hushed crowd. The auction was nearing its climax, and David Hale, the rancher, adjusted the brim of his hat, eyes narrowing at the scene before him. His fingers drummed on the weathered ledger, the promise of purchase stirring a quiet satisfaction within him. 7 figures were lined up, each standing with rigid posture, hands clasped in front, eyes alert but wary. They were not mere items of trade. Each carried a defiant spark that unsettled the onlookers. Among them, one stood slightly apart, Lila. Her dark hair fell in untamed waves, eyes glinting with both fear and resolve. She met Hale's gaze directly, unwavering. "You'll rue it. We won't obey," she said, voice steady despite the murmurs rippling through the crowd. The words sliced through the stale air like a knife, and a few heads turned, curiosity flickering behind their eyes. There was something about her, an unspoken promise of resistance, a fire that refused to be tamed. The auctioneer's gavel hovered in the air, poised to bring finality to the proceedings. Hale's gaze flicked to the others, 6 more girls, each with expressions ranging from caution to quiet defiance. They whispered among themselves, subtle gestures betraying fear, yet also a shared understanding that submission was not their nature. The barn seemed to hold its breath. $7 each, the auctioneer announced. The figure seemed almost symbolic, a mockery of their worth in the eyes of those present. Hale's hand shot up, firm and deliberate, and in that moment, ownership was declared. The transaction was swift, coins exchanged hands, papers signed, yet the energy within the barn refused to settle. As Hale stepped forward to inspect his acquisition, the girls' reactions were immediate and varied. Lila straightened, chin lifted. She would not yield easily. The other 6 flinched at his proximity, but mirrored her courage in smaller, quieter ways. It was clear they were not naive, and they were not powerless. Among the spectators, a figure lingered at the edge of the barn, a man whose presence seemed almost incidental, yet whose gaze remained fixed on Lila. Ethan Cole. He did not move forward, did not engage, yet every glance betrayed a growing intrigue. Something about Lila's audacity resonated with him, stirring curiosity and admiration in equal measure. He had come for reasons he could scarcely articulate, but now, watching her, he sensed the beginning of a story that would entangle them both. Hale, oblivious to the subtle dynamics around him, led the girls toward the stables. Faceless in the narrative of the auction, they moved with a mix of reluctance and silent calculation. Lila's mind raced, weighing every word, every gesture. Compliance would be demanded, yes, but submission? That was another matter entirely. She had already marked the first battle, her defiance. The barn emptied gradually, the echoes of the gavel fading into the distance. Outside, the sun cast long shadows across the dusty grounds. Lila and the other girls were herded toward their temporary quarters, their movements constrained but not entirely subdued. Ethan lingered behind, disappearing into the background, yet the memory of his watchful eyes lingered like a whisper, promising possibilities beyond the confines of the ranch. For Lila, the day had ended with a mixture of tension and clarity. She understood the stakes: control, resistance, and survival. She also sensed the subtle threads of human connection that might defy the boundaries imposed upon her. Her rebellion had been declared in a single, potent sentence: "You'll rue it, we won't obey." And though she did not yet know the consequences, she felt the quiet thrill of agency, a defiance that could not be bought, not even for $7. The barn doors closed behind them, a symbolic barrier between freedom and confinement. Yet in that moment, Lila knew the story had only begun. Outside, the wind carried the faintest echo of possibility, and within, a quiet determination hardened. Whatever lay ahead, she would navigate it with wit, courage, and an unyielding sense of self. Chapter 1 closed with the promise of struggle, of alliances yet to form, and of a tension that would only escalate. Lila's defiance, Hale's authority, and Ethan's silent intrigue set the stage for a tale where rebellion, desire, and danger intertwined in ways none of them could fully predict. Life on the ranch. The first light of dawn painted the ranch in muted gold, dust motes drifting lazily in the beams that pierced the cracks of the barn. The 7 girls stirred in their quarters, a small space partitioned with worn wooden dividers. Silence dominated, punctuated only by the distant lowing of cattle and the soft rustle of straw underfoot. Lila sat on the edge of her cot, fingers tracing the grains of the wood, mind alert despite the early hour. Her resolve remained firm. Obedience would be minimal, compliance measured, yet she would endure the day on her own terms. David Hale, oblivious to the undercurrents of defiance, began his rounds. His presence was both commanding and intrusive. The girls flinched instinctively at his approach, yet Lila met his gaze without wavering. He lingered longer than necessary, scrutinizing them as though trying to imprint control directly onto their minds. Hale's authority was absolute in appearance, but Lila recognized cracks in his confidence, subtle hesitations, fleeting doubts that hinted at vulnerabilities he would never admit aloud. The girls were assigned chores immediately. Some led the horses to the paddocks, others swept the barn, and Lila was tasked with tending to the livestock pens. Faceless shots captured hands gripping hay, boots crunching over dirt, and water splashing into troughs, gestures that spoke louder than words. The work was relentless, yet provided Lila a chance to observe, to strategize, and to test boundaries without direct confrontation. It was during these quiet moments that she first noticed Ethan Cole again. He appeared at the periphery, carrying buckets or tending equipment, yet his movements were deliberate, measured. Their eyes met briefly, a flicker of recognition, of unspoken connection. Though he spoke no words, the weight of his gaze communicated volumes. Something about him promised understanding, a safe harbor in a storm of surveillance and control. Lila felt her pulse quicken, a thrill tempered by the ever-present tension of the ranch. Conversations among the girls were muted and cautious. Each had her own strategy for survival, her own methods of resisting Hale's authority. Some whispered in the corners, sharing snippets of rebellion. Others maintained a careful neutrality, unwilling to draw attention, yet secretly observing Lila's fearless defiance. Bonds were forming, fragile but meaningful, hinting at the possibility of solidarity. Lila recognized the significance. Trust would be essential, even as secrecy became a necessity. Midday brought an unexpected pause. Hale called the girls to the main barn floor for inspection. Faceless shots emphasized movement and posture rather than identity. Feet shuffling, hands tightening, heads lowering in practiced respect. Hale's scrutiny was precise. He commented on small errors, subtle signs of disobedience, yet missed the quiet exchanges happening under his nose. Lila caught Ethan's gaze again, a brief meeting that carried both warning and invitation. He handed her a folded scrap of paper, a single word written in careful script: patience. The afternoon stretched long and oppressive. Chores continued. Meals were prepared in silence, and the girls navigated the constant presence of authority. Yet beneath the mundane routine, a network of glances, gestures, and shared glimmers of rebellion thrived. Lila discovered that the power of defiance did not require loud proclamations. It existed in small acts, in the refusal to surrender fully. By evening, shadows lengthened, casting the barn in muted shades. Lila stood at the threshold of the paddock, watching Hale inspect the horses. The tension between authority and resistance was palpable. Every measured step, every deliberate breath became a silent dialogue. Ethan remained in the background, observant, protective, yet careful not to draw attention. His presence was both comforting and dangerous, a symbol of possibility and risk entwined. As the day ended, Lila retreated to her quarters, heart racing with both exhaustion and anticipation. She unfolded Ethan's note once more, tracing the single word with her fingertip. Patience. It was a reminder, a challenge, and a promise all at once. The silent understanding between them grew, layered with tension, desire, and the thrill of defiance. The night settled over the ranch with an almost tangible weight. Lila lay on her cot, listening to the soft sounds of the animals, reflecting on the day's subtle victories and hidden dangers. Rebellion had taken root, not in grand gestures, but in the careful navigation of rules and attention. She understood now that survival would require more than strength. It would demand cunning, alliances, and the willingness to risk the consequences of forbidden connection. Chapter 2 closed on the cusp of discovery. Lila's quiet defiance had begun to ripple outward, touching the lives of the other girls and the enigmatic Ethan Cole. Authority and attraction coexisted in a precarious balance, hinting at the deeper conflicts and romantic entanglements yet to come. The story was accelerating, and the stakes were clear. In a world of control and surveillance, even the smallest act of rebellion could ignite consequences that none of them were prepared to face. Secrets in the shadows. Night draped the ranch in a heavy, quiet darkness, broken only by the flickering glow of lanterns and the distant hum of crickets. The barn, once bustling with the day's chores, now stood empty save for shadows and the occasional scuff of hooves in the paddocks. Lila moved cautiously along the narrow corridor, careful to avoid the sharp eyes of the guard stationed by the main gate. Each step was deliberate, measured, her senses attuned to the smallest sounds, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of the wind through cracks in the wood. Ethan awaited her near the edge of the storage shed, faceless in the dim light, his presence both reassuring and fraught with risk. A folded note had passed between them at midday, invisible to the prying eyes of Hale or the other staff. Now, under the cover of night, the communication became direct. Their fingers brushed briefly as she accepted a small, carefully prepared map, marked with paths and hidden vantage points around the ranch. "You shouldn't be here," Ethan murmured, voice low but urgent. He did not look directly at her, yet his posture conveyed both protectiveness and restraint. Lila responded with a defiant tilt of her chin, eyes scanning the shadows. "Neither should you," she whispered, a faint smile tugging at her lips. It was an acknowledgment of the danger, but also a recognition of the trust forming between them. The other girls slept fitfully in their quarters, unaware of the clandestine meeting. Each was wrapped in the rhythm of routine, the imposed rules of Hale's domain acting as both guard and prison. Lila, however, felt the exhilaration of stepping beyond that boundary, a thrill sharpened by the awareness of potential consequences. Every glance over her shoulder, every careful placement of a foot, became a negotiation with danger itself. They moved together toward the far paddocks, the moonlight casting faint silver lines across the ground. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of hay, earth, and livestock. Lila noticed small details she had ignored in daylight: the rusted hinge of a gate, a narrow ledge beside the barn, the shadowed alcoves that could conceal them from watchful eyes. Ethan's instructions were precise, his tone calm and measured, providing guidance without diminishing her agency. Once hidden in the shadowed corner of the barn, they allowed themselves a brief respite. Words flowed between them in hushed tones, not of mundane concerns but of subtle dreams, fleeting hopes, and the faint, dangerous pulse of desire. Each phrase carried weight, a combination of longing and calculation. Lila sensed the complexity of their bond. It was emotional, secretive, and, in its own way, defiant, a quiet rebellion against the control imposed by Hale. Yet the threat of discovery lingered. Hale's presence was not far, his influence radiating even in his absence. Every sound, the creak of a door, the snap of a branch underfoot, sent adrenaline surging through Lila. Ethan's hand brushed hers again, a fleeting touch that communicated both reassurance and warning. The intimacy of the moment was heightened by the peril surrounding them, Their connection was charged, dangerous, and intoxicating. Lila's mind wandered briefly to the other girls. Some, she knew, might be observing the subtle patterns of Hale's routine, awaiting the opportunity to act. The quiet solidarity forming among them was fragile, yet significant. Rebellion did not require confrontation alone. It could thrive in gestures, glances, and shared knowledge, growing steadily beneath the surface. A sudden noise, metal against metal, caused both to freeze. Lila's breath caught, heart hammering, but Ethan's steady presence grounded her. They remained motionless until the sound faded into the background hum of the night. It was a reminder of the stakes. Exposure could mean punishment or worse. The thrill of secrecy was inseparable from the danger it entailed. Before parting, Ethan pressed another folded note into her hand, small but deliberate. "Trust the plan." The words were simple, yet potent, a combination of guidance, promise, and caution. Lila tucked it carefully into her coat, a talisman against fear, a beacon of purpose. They separated silently, retreating to the safety of their respective quarters. The moon climbed higher, bathing the ranch in a pale, watchful light. Lila lay on her cot, mind racing with the events of the night. She felt the stirrings of forbidden desire, yes, but also the clarity of purpose, rebellion, survival, and connection intertwined in ways that could not be ignored. Chapter 3 closed with the unspoken understanding between Lila and Ethan deepening, rebellion simmering among the girls, and the stakes of discovery looming ever closer. The story had moved from defiance in daylight to secret intimacy under shadow, setting the stage for confrontation, revelation, and the consequences of desire in the chapters to come. Confrontation and consequences. Dawn broke over the ranch with a muted, almost hesitant light, casting long shadows across the barn and paddocks. The quiet of the early morning was deceptive. Tension had been building unseen, like a storm gathering at the horizon. Lila moved carefully through the narrow corridors of the quarters, her fingers grazing the worn wood as if drawing courage from its solidity. Today, everything felt different, charged with possibility, danger, and the undeniable weight of choices yet to be made. David Hale's presence loomed larger than ever, faceless and commanding. He had sensed the subtle fractures in his authority. Something had shifted. The defiance that had once seemed manageable now hummed like electricity through the ranch. He paused at the threshold of the barn, scanning the shadows, his hands tightening at his sides. Lila felt it even from a distance, the silent assertion of power, and she steeled herself. This day would test not just obedience, but courage. The other girls moved in careful synchrony, silent allies in a network of quiet rebellion. Each had learned to read the signs, anticipate instructions, and navigate the fragile balance of compliance and resistance. The barn, once a place of control, had become a theater of hidden defiance. Small gestures, a shifted step, a glance exchanged, a hand left unturned, spoke volumes, signaling solidarity without words. Ethan Cole emerged from the shadows near the edge of the paddock, his movements cautious yet purposeful. He did not approach too closely, but his presence was unmistakable, a reminder of both hope and risk. Lila's gaze met his for the briefest moment, an exchange of understanding that transcended words. Their bond, forged in secrecy, had become a quiet strength, guiding her through the perils of the day. Hale's inspection began, systematic and relentless. Faceless shots captured hands gripping tools, feet pacing over straw, the subtle weight of authority pressing down on each girl. Yet even as he scrutinized, small cracks appeared in his observation. Lila, with measured precision, directed attention to mundane tasks, masking her intentions while remaining alert for opportunity. She had learned that rebellion did not always roar, it often whispered. Then it happened. A misstep, a clatter of metal from the far stall, sent Hale's attention sharply in that direction. Lila, prepared for the moment, seized the chance. She stepped forward, voice calm but unwavering, explaining the task at hand with such clarity and composure that suspicion faltered. The other girls mirrored her movements subtly, creating an orchestrated distraction. Each gesture reinforced the unspoken alliance that had grown over days of observation and quiet resistance. Ethan's presence became instrumental. From the shadows, he subtly redirected Hale's focus, guiding his line of sight away from Lila's true actions. Every movement was deliberate, every glance intentional, a silent choreography of rebellion and protection. Lila felt a surge of exhilaration, the thrill of agency tempered by the ever-present possibility of discovery. When Hale finally paused, uncertainty flickered across his faceless authority. He sensed, vaguely, the threads of defiance that had grown too large to ignore. The girl's composure, Lila's clarity, Ethan's subtle interventions, it all combined into a tension that even he could not fully suppress. For the first time, the veneer of control cracked, revealing vulnerability beneath the imposed dominance. By evening, the ranch was quiet again, but the dynamics had shifted irrevocably. Lila stood near the paddocks, her posture relaxed but alert. Ethan approached, faceless yet unmistakably present, and offered a small, reassuring nod. The girls gathered, their silent solidarity a testament to endurance, strategy, and courage. Hale remained, surveying the grounds, but the balance had changed. Power was no longer absolute. Defiance and alliance had altered the equation. Lila clutched the folded note Ethan had given her earlier, rereading its simple instruction: trust the plan. It had guided her through danger, forged connection, and shaped the rebellion into something tangible. She realized that survival was not merely about obedience. It was about understanding, strategy, and the willingness to embrace risk in the pursuit of freedom and choice. Chapter 4 closed with the quiet triumph of agency. Lila and Ethan's bond had strengthened. The girls' subtle rebellion had shifted the power dynamics, and Hale's authority had been challenged in ways that could not be undone. The story ended not with overt confrontation, but with a lingering tension of possibility, a victory measured in resilience, loyalty, and the courage to defy expectations.